My name is Claire Holloway, and the worst night of my adult life happened exactly 9 hours after I walked out of the burn unit for the last time. 12 years. That's how long I spent in the ER at Mercy General in Buffalo, and the last 4 were inside the burn unit, which is a particular kind of medicine that most people don't understand until they've seen it. People think nursing is bedpans and clipboards. Burn nursing is changing dressings on a 4-year-old who screams because the morphine isn't enough, because nothing is ever enough, and then going home and microwaving a frozen lasagna because you forgot to grocery shop again. I gave my notice in October. I told my supervisor I needed a year. She nodded like she'd been expecting it. Everybody leaves eventually. The ones who don't end up sleeping in their cars in the parking garage between shifts. I drove from Buffalo to my older brother's place in Greenwich, Connecticut, because my mother had been gone 7 months and I hadn't dealt with any of it. The funeral, the house, the small estate, the boxes still stacked in her living room in the little farmhouse outside Saratoga where I grew up. My brother had handled all of it, or said he had. He was the executor. He was the one with the law degree and the corner office at a private equity firm in Stamford. And he had told me, gently, the way he told everyone everything, that I should focus on my patients and let him take care of the family business. I had. For 7 months I had. And now I was driving down the Merritt Parkway in a Subaru that smelled like coffee and antiseptic, with a duffel bag in the trunk and exactly $3,200 in my checking account. Because I'd been paying off a private student loan from nursing school for 12 years and had only just finished it that summer. It started snowing around Danbury. By the time I crossed into Greenwich, it was the kind of snow that doesn't fall so much as collapse. Big, wet sheets of it coming down all at once. I'd texted my brother that morning. Coming down for a few days. Need to talk about mom's stuff. He'd responded with a thumbs up. I should have known. I should have known when I pulled up to his house and saw the valet stand at the end of the driveway. A red velvet rope. 2 young men in black peacoats stamping their boots in the snow. There was a tent set up on the side lawn, the heated kind with industrial blowers, and through the front windows I could see the warm gold of chandeliers and the slow movement of expensive people holding small plates. I parked at the curb 100 feet down because I wasn't going to hand my keys to a valet wearing a coat that cost more than my rent. I walked up the driveway in my scrubs. I hadn't changed. I'd worked a half shift that morning before driving, a clinical handoff for the new girl, and I was still in the navy Cherokees I'd bought at Costco and a fleece pullover that said Murky Burn Unit in faded white lettering on the chest. The young man at the door, who couldn't have been more than 22, looked at me like I was a contractor. Name, please? I'm his sister. He didn't move. He didn't blink. He just said, "Whose sister, ma'am?" I told him. He spoke quietly into a small earpiece. I watched the snow gather on the shoulders of his coat. My brother appeared in the entryway a moment later, holding a tumbler of something amber. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie, the collar of his shirt open, the kind of look that costs more than it appears to. "Claire," he said. His face did something I'd seen him do before, a small recalibration, the way a person adjusts to a smell they weren't prepared for. "Jesus, you're here," I texted. I know you did. I just didn't realize you meant tonight. It's Friday." I said I was coming this weekend. He glanced over his shoulder, then stepped out onto the portico and pulled the door mostly closed behind him. The snow blew sideways under the overhang and landed in my hair. "It's not a good time. I see that. It's a partners event. I'm hosting the managing partner. There are 40 people in there, Claire. I'll go upstairs. I won't come down." He looked at me, really looked at me, at the scrubs, at the fleece, at the wet hair sticking to my forehead, at my hands, which were red from the cold because I'd left my gloves in the car. "Where's your bag?" "In my trunk." "Claire." He pinched the bridge of his nose. The tumbler in his other hand tilted slightly and a drop of bourbon fell onto the slate. "Why didn't you stay at a hotel?" "I don't have hotel money." "You don't have." He stopped. He laughed a short, surprised laugh, the kind people use when they're insulted. "You're a nurse. You've worked at a level 1 trauma center for over a decade. You don't have hotel money." "I just paid off Buffalo State 9 days ago." I have $3,000 and I quit my job. You quit your job. I'm taking a year. A year. He said it the way you'd say a brain tumor. Claire, what are you doing? Can we go inside? I'm soaked. He turned and looked at the door. Through the side light, I could see a woman in a black dress laughing at something, her head tilted back, a glass of champagne held with 2 fingers like she was afraid of it. My brother's wife. Her name is Reagan, and she's never really known what to do with me. You can't come in, he said. Not like this. I'll change. There are 40 people in there from my firm, Claire. There are clients. There's a journalist from the Wall Street Journal who's doing a profile on the practice. I have other clothes in the car. You don't get it. He said this very softly, very evenly. The way he used to talk to me when I was 9 and he was 12 and I was crying because I didn't understand something he thought was obvious. It's not about the clothes. I didn't say anything for a moment. The snow had filled in his footprints on the slate. I could feel my fingers starting to go numb in a familiar pattern, the way they did when I was triaging frostbite in February. Okay, I said. Then I'll come back tomorrow. Where are you going to go tonight? I'll figure it out. Claire, he pulled out his phone. I'll get you a room at the Delamar. I'll cover it. Just. I don't want you to cover it. Don't be like this. I'm not being like anything. He stared at me. And then he said the thing. He said it quietly, the way a person says something they've been holding for a long time and never thought they'd actually let out. You know what your problem is. I waited. You spent 12 years cleaning up after dying people. And you walk around like that's a personality, like the rest of us are supposed to feel small because we have offices and you have a stethoscope. Mom thought you hung the moon. She thought you were a saint. I had to sit at her bedside for the last 4 months while you were on the other side of the state changing bandages on strangers. And I had to listen to her tell me how proud she was of Claire, and I never said anything because she was dying and you weren't there. And that was the whole story. I came every weekend I could. You came when it was convenient. I worked 12-hour shifts, so did I. You worked at a desk. His face went still in a way I'd never seen before. The bourbon swirled in the glass. You're a failure, he said. He said it the way a person makes an observation about the weather. You're 33 years old. You have no savings. You have no husband. You have no children. You have no career anymore because you walked away from the only thing that gave you any structure. And you show up at my house in scrubs during a partner's dinner asking to sleep on my couch. That's not a sister. That's a charity case. And I'm tapped out, Claire. I really am. I stood there. I couldn't feel my hands. I could feel snow melting down the back of my neck, working its way under the fleece collar. I want Mom's house keys, I said. What? You have Mom's house keys, I said. What? You have Mom's house keys. I want them. I'll drive up to Saratoga tonight. That house is a disaster. The heat's barely working. I had it winterized in November. I want the keys. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he turned, opened the front door just enough to slip an arm through, and came back with a small ring of keys. He held them out. I took them. The metal was so cold it burned. Drive safe, he said. Thanks. Claire, I turned. He looked like he wanted to say something softer, something that might have softened him too. But 40 people were waiting and a journalist was inside and Reagan was watching through the side light with that fixed, laughing expression, and whatever he was about to say, he didn't. He closed the door. I walked back down the driveway. My Subaru was already covered in 3 inches of snow. I sat in the driver's seat for a minute with the engine off, listening to the wipers groan, and then I started the car and pulled onto the parkway and drove north toward the only house in the world that still belonged to my family. It took me 4.5 hours in the snow. I got to my mother's farmhouse a little after 2 in the morning. The driveway was a ribbon of unbroken white and I had to leave the car at the road and walk up with my duffel over my shoulder, the way I'd done 1,000 times in middle school when the plows hadn't come yet. The key still worked. The house was 46 degrees. The pilot light on the boiler had blown out and I could hear mice in the kitchen wall. I sat down on the bench inside the mudroom and I cried for the first time since the funeral. Not loud. I don't really cry loud, just the wet, quiet kind, the kind where you don't even bother wiping your face because it isn't worth the effort. Then I got up. I relit the boiler. I plugged in the space heater in the living room. I made instant coffee on the gas stove because the electric kettle was packed in one of the boxes. I sat at the kitchen table in my coat and watched the snow come down against the dark window. And I thought about how my mother used to sit in that exact chair with the New York Times crossword on Sunday mornings. And how she'd say, "Claire Bear, what's a 7-letter word for resilience?" And I'd say, "I don't know, Mom. I'm 12. I slept on the couch. I dreamed about the burn unit. I woke up around 8 to weak gray light and the smell of cold dust, and I started doing what I always do when I don't know what else to do, which is work. I made a list. I made coffee. I started going through the boxes my brother had stacked in the living room and labeled in black Sharpie. Kitchen. Books. Bedroom. Misc. It was in the box labeled Misc. It wasn't the only thing in there. It was buried under an old tin of buttons, 2 photo albums, a stack of unopened sympathy cards, and a fleece blanket I recognized from her hospital bed at Saratoga General. But under all of that, wrapped in a kitchen towel, was a small accordion folder. The kind that closes with an elastic band. The elastic was so old it broke when I touched it. Inside were 4 things. A sealed envelope with my name written on it in my mother's handwriting. Not Claire. Claire Bear. In blue ballpoint. A leather-bound notebook I'd never seen before. A manila folder labeled Mapley Street. Do not discard. And a key. A small brass key, the kind that fits a safe deposit box. I sat down on the floor. I opened the envelope first. My mother had cancer for 2 years before she died, and she'd had a lot of time to prepare, but I'd never seen this letter. My brother had handled the estate. He'd given me a copy of the will. The will had been simple. The farmhouse to be sold and the proceeds split evenly between us. Her 2 retirement accounts liquidated and split evenly. A small life insurance payout that went to him as the named beneficiary because they'd set it up when I was a teenager and never updated it. Clean. Fair, he'd said. The letter was 3 pages long, handwritten on the lined yellow legal pads she'd used for everything, grocery lists to lesson plans. She'd been a high school biology teacher for 31 years. She wrote the way she talked, plain and clear, with the occasional dash where most people would have used a comma. Claire Bear, if you're reading this, then you found the folder, which means you came back to the house yourself, which is what I hoped for. Your brother is a good man in some ways, but he's not the one I'm writing to. I'm writing to you. I need to tell you some things I didn't want to say out loud while I was still alive, because I didn't trust myself to say them right, and because there was no point until I was gone. The first thing is that I love you. That should be obvious. But I want it in writing where you can hold it, because love that you only hear is easier to forget. The second thing is that the will you saw is not the only will. I stopped reading. I went back to that line and read it again. I read it a 3rd time. I looked at the manila folder on the floor next to my knee, and then I looked back at the letter. There is a more recent will, executed in March of last year, witnessed by Dr. Patel and my friend Margaret from the church, both of whom you've met. It is filed with an attorney named Susan Iwasaki in Albany, whose card is in the folder. Your brother does not know about it. I asked Susan to hold it until either you came looking or until a year had passed since my death, whichever came first. I don't want you to think badly of your brother, but I also don't want you to think well of him for things he didn't do. He helped me, he visited, he arranged things. But he also moved several of my accounts in the last year of my life, and he had me sign documents I now believe I did not fully understand. And when I asked Dr. Pottle for a competency evaluation last spring, your brother became very angry with me, and I let it drop, because I was tired and because I was afraid of being alone at the end. I was not alone at the end. You came. You came every other weekend for 2 years. You sat with me. You changed my dressings when the home health nurse couldn't make it through the snow. You knew what I needed before I did, because that is your job and also because you are my daughter. The farmhouse is yours. The retirement accounts are split, as the public will says, because I didn't want to start a war I couldn't finish. But there's a safe deposit box at the M&T branch in Saratoga Springs that your father and I opened in 1991 when we sold the orchard. Your father's family land. That money was never spent. It was always meant for one of you, but only one. And I want you to read the notebook before you understand why. Read the notebook before you do anything. Promise me. Read it cover to cover. Then call Susan. I love you, Claire Bear. I love you in a way that does not require you to be useful to me. I hope you know that. I hope someday you let yourself rest. Mom. I put the letter down. I put my hands flat on the floor on either side of my knees. I sat there for a long time. The space heater clicked. Then I picked up the notebook. It was my mother's handwriting, from start to finish, and it was dated. The first entry was from January of the year before she died. The last was from 3 weeks before her death, in a hand that had started to shake. It wasn't a diary. It was something more careful than that. It was an account, a timeline, entries with dates and quotes and amounts. January 14, your brother visited. He brought tax forms for me to sign and said they were routine. I signed them. I do not have copies. February 3, your brother asked me to change my healthcare proxy from Dr. Patel to himself. I agreed. I now wonder if this was wise. March 22nd, your brother moved my Vanguard account into a new account under joint name. He says this is for ease of probate. I am not sure what that means. April 8th, I asked your brother about Claire's portion of the orchard money. He said the orchard money was always for him. I do not remember this being true. The entries kept going. They got more careful, more documented. She'd started taking photographs of documents on her phone and printing them at the public library, and several of these were folded inside the back cover of the notebook. Bank statements. A power of attorney with a date that didn't match what she'd been told. A transfer of a brokerage account into a joint tenancy with right of survivorship, which any first-year law student could explain, meant the entire account passed to my brother on her death, without going through probate at all. In the manila folder were copies of everything. Originals were with Susan Owasaki in Albany. I sat on that floor for 2 hours. I didn't move. I didn't make more coffee. At some point, I noticed I was shivering and I pulled the fleece blanket from the box and wrapped it around my shoulders. It smelled like my mother. Lavender hand cream and the faint chlorine of the hospital. When I was a kid, my father used to tell me that the only thing more dangerous than a quiet person is a quiet person who keeps records. He said it about a foreman at his contracting company who got fired for skimming. He didn't know he was describing his own wife. I drove to Albany on Monday morning. I called from the road. Susan Iwasaki had been expecting me for 7 months. She was small and gray-haired, and she wore a cardigan with elbow patches, and she had a way of speaking that made me trust her in the first 90 seconds, which is a thing I rarely do. She walked me through the second will, which left the farmhouse and the contents of the safe deposit box to me outright. And she walked me through what she called the other matter, which was a quiet, slow, methodical accounting of every transfer my brother had executed during the last 14 months of our mother's life. I want you to understand something before we go any further, Susan said. She had her hands folded on the desk. Your mother did not want a lawsuit. She wanted you to have what was hers to give. She also wanted there to be a record in case you needed one. What you do with that record is your decision. I can give you my opinion if you want it. I want it. My opinion is that your brother did not steal from your mother in a way that any prosecutor in this state would touch. He used legal instruments aggressively. He moved assets into joint accounts. He did so with documents that your mother signed. A jury would never call it theft. A probate court might call it undue influence, but undue influence is hard to prove after the principal has died, and litigation is expensive. And the most likely outcome is a settlement that costs you 2 years of your life and most of what you'd recover. Okay. However, she slid a folder across the desk. Your brother is a registered investment advisor. He holds Series 7 and Series 65 licenses. He is a fiduciary. The transfers he executed for your mother in the last year of her life were not done in a personal capacity. They went through accounts he controls professionally. That is a different conversation, and that conversation involves FINRA, which is the regulatory body that oversees his license, and it involves the Connecticut Department of Banking. Neither of those bodies require a lawsuit or a jury. They require a complaint. And your mother's notebook, with dates and quotes and documentary evidence, is exactly the kind of complaint they take seriously. I sat there for a moment. What would happen to him? That depends. A formal investigation. Suspension of his license during the investigation is possible. If the firm has policies about advising family members, which most of them do, he may have violated firm policy in addition to industry regulation. His employer would be notified. There would be a process. How long? Months. Possibly a year. These things move slowly. I looked at the folder. Susan, I said, I don't want to destroy him. I'm not asking you to. I want him to understand what he did. That, she said, is a different thing than a complaint. That's a conversation. I drove back to Saratoga that night. The snow had stopped. The roads were salted and clear. The farmhouse was warm because I'd left the space heater on, and the boiler was working again because the man from Stewart's Plumbing had come Sunday afternoon and replaced the thermocouple for $180. I sat at the kitchen table and I made my list. I called the bank in the morning. I opened the safe deposit box with a small brass key. Inside were 3 things. A certified check from the sale of my paternal grandfather's apple orchard in 1991, made out to my parents and never deposited. A stack of savings bonds dating back to the 70s, and a handwritten note from my father, who had been gone since I was 19. That said, for the daughter who chooses to come home. The check had been kept liquid by my mother's careful renewal of an FDIC-insured account at the bank for 34 years. With interest, accumulated and compounded under a structure I did not fully understand. But Susan would explain to me later it was a little over $420,000. I called Susan. We filed the FINRA complaint on a Thursday. I called my brother on Friday. I didn't ask him to come up. I asked him to meet me at a diner off I-87 halfway between us, in a town called Catskill, on a Saturday morning. He came. He looked tired. He was wearing a sweater I'd given him for Christmas 4 years earlier, which surprised me because I didn't think he kept things like that. He sat down across from me in the booth. The waitress brought coffee. He ordered eggs. I ordered nothing. I got a call from compliance, he said. I figured. You did this. I filed a complaint, yes. Claire, his voice was very quiet, do you understand what you've done? I think so. I have a hearing. I have to appear in front of my firm's compliance committee. I had to disclose this to the managing partner, the one who was at my house. There are people who think I should be put on administrative leave. Okay, that's all you have to say. I have a lot to say. I'm choosing what to say. He stared at me. His hand was shaking round the coffee cup. I'd never seen his hand shake before. He was 4 years older than me, and I'd watched him give a wedding toast in front of 300 people without a tremor. Why, he said. Mom kept a notebook. He didn't say anything. She kept it for 14 months. She wrote down everything. The proxy change. The Vanguard transfer. The joint account. The signed forms. She photographed the documents. She sent the originals to a lawyer in Albany. That's not, it is. I've seen them. He looked at the window. His jaw worked. I didn't take anything from her, he said. I know. What? I know you didn't take anything from her. You took it from me. There's a difference, and you know there is. You used your fiduciary license to move our mother's accounts into a structure where I wouldn't get half. You did that knowing she was sick. You did it because you thought I wouldn't notice, and you thought she wouldn't either, and you were almost right. I helped her. You did help her. I'm not saying you didn't, but that's not all you did. He set the cup down. The coffee spilled over the rim onto the saucer. What do you want, he said. I want you to know that I know. That's it? No. I also want you to sit in front of your compliance committee and answer their questions. I want there to be a record. Whatever they decide is what they decide. I'm not asking them for anything specific. I'm not suing you. I'm not coming after the inheritance you've already collected. I'm letting the people whose job it is to look at what you did, look at it too. They'll suspend my license. Maybe Reagan. He stopped. Reagan and I are looking at houses in Darien. I know. This will end that. I know. He looked at me for a long time. The diner was quiet. A truck pulled into the lot outside and a man in an orange vest got out and stretched. You used to be a kind person, he said. I'm still a kind person. I'm being kind to the version of Mom who spent the last year of her life keeping a notebook because she didn't trust her own son. That's the person I'm being kind to right now. It's not you. It's never going to be you again, not the way it was. I'm sorry. I really am. He didn't eat his eggs. He paid the check. He walked out to the parking lot and sat in his car for 10 minutes before he drove away. The compliance committee found in February that he had violated firm policy regarding advising family members and had failed to obtain required documentation for 2 transfers. He was not stripped of his license. He was placed on a 1-year probation, fined $62,000 by FinRay, and asked to leave his firm. He took a job at a smaller shop in White Plains. Reagan stayed. They didn't buy the house in Darien. I went back to the farmhouse. I did not become a different person. I want to say that because I think a lot of stories like this end with the woman becoming a different person, and I didn't. I was still tired. I still woke up at 3 a.m. thinking about the boy in bed 7 with the burns on his face. I still cried sometimes in the grocery store for no reason I could name, but I used some of the money to do some things. I had the boiler replaced. I had the roof patched. I had the kitchen redone in a plain, clean way, white cabinets and a butcher block counter, because my mother had wanted to do it for 15 years and hadn't. I kept the farmhouse. I didn't sell it. I used a larger portion of the money to start something small. I called it the Holloway Project after my mother, who had been a teacher first and a patient second. It was a respite house for nurses. Just a house. A 4-bedroom rental in a quiet town in the Adirondacks where burnt-out hospital nurses could come for up to 2 weeks at a time. Free, no questions asked, no paperwork beyond a license verification. They could sleep, they could not sleep, they could not sleep, they could walk in the woods, they could sit on the porch in a sweater and stare at the lake. I hired a part-time coordinator who'd retired from oncology nursing at Albany Med. She and I ran intake. We took referrals from hospital social workers. We were full within 4 months. I went back to work in October. Not in the burn unit. I took a job at a small community clinic in Glens Falls, 3 days a week, mostly diabetes care and wound management for an elderly population that thanked me every visit. It was slower. It was quieter. It paid less. I was okay. My brother called me on the anniversary of our mother's death. I didn't pick up. He left a voicemail. He didn't apologize, not exactly. He said he'd been thinking. He said he'd been seeing someone, a therapist, and that some things were starting to come into focus. He said he was sorry about the night with the snow. He said he hoped I'd call him back when I was ready. I called him back 6 weeks later. We talked for 20 minutes. It was a hard, careful conversation. The kind where you can hear the other person picking each word up like it's hot. We didn't fix anything, but we talked. He came to the farmhouse for Christmas. Just him. Reagan stayed in Greenwich. He brought a poinsettia and a tin of cookies from a bakery near his office. He helped me carry firewood in from the shed. He stood in the kitchen and looked at the new cabinets for a long time and didn't say anything. After dinner, he said, "Mom would have liked this kitchen." I said, "I know." He said, "I miss her." I said, "I know you do." We sat on the porch in our coats and watched the snow come down through the floodlight over the driveway. He didn't try to make me forgive him. I didn't try to forgive him. Something else was happening. Slower than forgiveness and maybe more durable. I don't have a word for it yet. My mother left me a house and a notebook and a brass key. But what she really left me, the thing I keep coming back to, is the line in her letter. Love that you only hear is easier to forget. She wrote it down because she wanted me to be able to hold it. She knew something about what people remember and what people lose. I keep her letter in the drawer of the table by my bed. I read it sometimes when I can't sleep, which is most nights, still, but fewer than before. If you've ever come home to a door that wouldn't open for you, or stood in the cold while someone you loved decided you weren't worth the warmth, I want you to know something. The story isn't over at that door. The story is what you do after. And sometimes the people who left you out there were keeping notebooks of their own. Sometimes the truth was already on its way to you, by mail, by lawyer, by a small brass key in a box in the back of a closet. Stay warm. Keep your records. And don't ever let anyone tell you that the work of caring for people is a personality flaw. It's the only work that matters. I think about that night on my brother's portico more than I should. The snow on the slate, the valet's coat, the 30 seconds between when he stepped out the door and when he said the word failure. I keep coming back to those 30 seconds because that's where the whole story actually lived. Everything that happened after, the notebook, the lawyer in Albany, the FINRA complaint, the brass key in the safe deposit box, all of it was already set in motion long before I drove down that driveway. My mother had spent the last 14 months of her life writing things down at her kitchen table, and my brother had spent those same 14 months moving accounts around, and the only person in the family who didn't know any of it was me, because I was 400 miles away changing dressings on a child who would never look the same again. What I learned, in the months after, is that cause and effect doesn't always look the way we think it should. My brother didn't lose his firm because I was angry. He lost it because he made a series of small, technical choices over 14 months, and each one left a fingerprint, and my mother, who he thought was confused, was quietly photographing every fingerprint with her phone. He built the outcome with his own hands. I just delivered the envelope. The thing I want you to take from this, if you take anything, is that the people who do quiet, careful work in the world are not weak. My mother taught high school biology for 31 years and lived in the same farmhouse for 40, and my brother thought she was the easy mark in the family because she didn't speak loudly or argue back. He was wrong about her in a way that cost him everything. Steady people are not slow people. They are people who have decided that the record matters more than the argument. I also want to say something about the work of caring for people who are suffering, whether that's in a burn unit or a classroom or a kitchen, where you make dinner for someone who can't lift a fork anymore, is not a lower form of life. It is not a personality flaw. It is not what you do because you couldn't do anything else. It is the foundation everything else rests on, and the people who do it should not have to apologize for it on anyone's portico in any weather. If you are standing in the cold tonight, in a literal storm or some other kind, I want you to remember 3 things. Be the kind of person who keeps records, because the truth doesn't keep itself. Be the kind of person who does the small, careful work, even when no one claps, because that work is what holds the rest of the world up. And when the door finally closes behind you, walk down the driveway. Don't look back. Somewhere ahead of you, in a house you haven't gotten to yet, someone who loved you left a letter in a box and it's been waiting for you the whole time.